Is the established world order cracking up? Right now in Poland, thousands of experts and politicians are talking about how to save our planet from climate change. The eminent naturalist David Attenborough is there, imploring world leaders to lead. Arnie, the Terminator's there too, literally begging politicians to work together. But what are the chances they'll cooperate? Just look at how they handled or mishandled the G20 summit in Argentina.
The G20 brings together countries that collectively constitute 85% of gross world product, 2/3 of the world's population, and around half of the world's land area. It is a vital forum in which we can work together to achieve strong, sustainable and balanced growth.
What is that, a high five? All smiles and laughter like long-lost buddies.
They clearly were very happy to see each other. Very different, Brett, from everyone else.
The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is being criticized because of the Khashoggi case.
I think he's complicit in the murder of Mr. Khashoggi to the highest level possible.
There's been a lot of debate over how world leaders should handle interactions with the Crown Prince. The strategy seemed to be keep your distance.
İnsanlığın vicdanı ancak emri verenden uygulayana kadar herkesten hesap sorulması halinde mutmain olacaktır.
President Donald Trump with the President Macron of Argentina, and he's welcoming him, but apparently they're pumping the wrong language into Donald Trump's ear. He throws his earpiece on the ground. He says, this isn't working. He's frustrated and flustered.
Trump shakes hands with the Argentinian president, and then he walks off stage. Someone goes after him.
Is there a more exhausting job than man who has to chase President Trump?
Macron, okay? He arrives in Buenos Aires. He's expecting what? The usual reception.
They were supposed to be greeted at the bottom by Argentina's vice president, but because of a little mix-up, she wasn't there, and instead he was greeted by this airport worker in a yellow vest. Now, this has highly amused the French since Macron is currently facing protests from that Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest movement.
It's like he's getting there and he's thinking, oh my God, did these protesters follow me?
Well, time for our panel now. Let's begin with someone who was actually there, Dr. Tristan Naylor from the London School of Economics. Tristan, when we look at them getting ready for the family photo, it's beginning to look a little bit like a dysfunctional world family. Is it more dysfunctional than normal, or is it just the way it looks?
I think in some pretty critical ways it is more dysfunctional than normal. They're certainly with the most powerful leaders who are members of the G20. There are massive disagreements between them, and I think that reflects in certainly the way they stand in the family photo.
Scott, same question to you. Just generally, is global governance in a bit of a mess now, or just the same as always?
Well, there's always challenges to governance in every decade, but what I think here is, to put it bluntly, we got more jokers in the pack here. We've got Donald Trump challenging economic order with tariffs threatened everywhere. We've got Vladimir Putin threatening security order. And then you've got rising individuals like Mohammed bin Salman who appear to be willing to break the rules to order the murder of people who they might find inconvenient.
Yeah, just very briefly, Alexei, would you say overall, from the French perspective, global governance is cracking up, or is it pretty much plus ça change?
I think global governments come to the end of one cycle, which was globalization. Now we see that a new world is emerging where we have to look at ecological threats and other things. And clearly these world leaders are not up to the job. So maybe it's time to change our leaders rather than to change governance.
Well, let's take a look at that family photo again. There's the Saudi Arabian Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. None of the big names appear to be standing next to him. Tristan, what choice do the world leaders have when it comes to that photograph and where they stand?
Well, it's very much in the hands of the host government. There's a bit of protocol that directs where people stand. The host leader in the center, flanked by the immediate past host and then the next host of the G20. In this case, the German chancellor wasn't there for the family photo because her plane broke down on the way, which is why things were a bit out of order in the center. And then it's largely up to the host government who stands where beyond those central three.
Let's take a look at the picture of the summit, surely. President Putin warmly greeting Mohammed bin Salman. Now, in some quarters, Mohammed bin Salman is suspected of ordering the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Why would Putin embrace him in such a warm and friendly manner?
Well, I've been watching these summits now for the past 10 years, and unquestionably this was a deliberate greeting. It was very much a performance put on for everybody else in the room.
You know, other people say he looked isolated, mostly. Some say he was the star of the show. Which is it?
It's both, because while some countries may be putting him at a distance, that's an opportunity for the Russians. So if the United States isn't going to sell the Saudis arms, Russia will. If the United States doesn't want to deal with Saudi economically, well, Russia likes to deal with oil and gas. So, you know, one man's isolation is another person's opportunity. Vladimir Putin was that person.
Well, let's bring up that family photograph again. You got Mr. Trump there and Mr. Putin this time. Trump was supposed to have a 2-hour meeting with Putin, but cancelled it on the plane over because of the clash, ostensibly at least, between Russian and Ukrainian forces near the Black Sea. Professor Scott Lucas, I can see the expression on your face. Do you believe Donald Trump's account of why he cancelled that meeting?
I'm looking at my fellow panelists, and you can see the skepticism there as well.
Yeah,
no,
true.
Domestic problems always can affect international activities. And in this case, Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's longtime fixer and lawyer, spilled the beans that the Trump economic activities, specifically to get a Trump Tower in Moscow, may have interacted with the Trump campaign in 2016. So to appear with Vladimir Putin and possibly being very friendly to him, only hours after that news shook up headlines, that wouldn't have worked very well in terms of, let's say, public relations for Donald.
Now, Professor Lucas, we know you very well here on this show, so I prepared a little I prepared a little background for you. Here's the Trump-Putin pre-G20 timeline, and we'll come back to the professor in a moment. On Sunday, the 25th, the clash in the Sea of Azov. 2 days later, Trump tells the Washington Post, maybe I won't have the meeting, and that it depends on the full report from his national security team. 2 days later, a lot happens. Michael Cohen, his former lawyer, admits to lying to Congress about the president's involvement in an aborted real estate deal in Moscow. Shortly afterwards,
he's a weak person, and what he's trying to do is get a reduced sentence. So he's lying about a project that everybody knew about.
That evening, Trump takes Air Force One to Argentina, and while in the air, he reads the full report into the Russia-Ukraine clash, and then tweets out this. Based on the fact that the ships and sailors have not been returned to Ukraine from Russia, I have decided it would be best for all parties concerned to cancel my previously scheduled meeting. Now, Scott, he told the Washington Post days before Michael Cohen said anything that he was considering cancelling the visit, the meeting with Putin, depending on what was said in the full report. Does that change your mind in any way?
Well, what it indicates is not Donald Trump pushing for distance because of that. It's his agencies. So specifically, State Department, the Pentagon, the National Security Council, all worried about Putin's activities. And in a sense, they are trying to sort of push Trump to distance himself. It just so happened that Michael Cohen, I think, was the catalyst that helped those agencies rather than Donald taking the initiative himself.
You're nodding your head in agreement, Tristan?
I think that's absolutely the case.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Now, Putin was asked if he thought Trump had another secret reason to cancel the meeting. Pretty much ruled that out. Have a listen.
Я не думаю, что президент Трамп чего-то опасается. Он человек с характером и очень опытный человек, взрослый, поэтому это не соответствует действительности, это уже точно. Но вот вы видели, к сожалению, столкнулись с этой провокацией в Черном море.
Well, all the official denials in the world can't stop the satirists poking fun. Here's Saturday Night Live doing what it does best.
I can't believe you and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia had that whole handshake yesterday.
Oh, what? That meant nothing to me. It was just a totally improvised handshake. I'm not like bros with him or anything.
Hey, Vladdy Daddy.
What the F is up, homie? Number one.
Vladdy, check it. When I killed that guy the other day, Trump was like, oh, please tell me you didn't do it. I was like, you want oil or not?
One, two, three,
Let's go back to Scott Lucas. Scott, does it have any bearing in real-life geopolitics? In other words, is it true, as a result of this Khashoggi incident, that the United States, President Trump, is going to be under pressure to move away from Mohammed bin Salman, allowing President Putin to move closer?
Well, the pressure right now is coming from inside the United States, whereas U.S. senators who have been briefed by the CIA about Mohammed bin Salman's likely culpability are possibly pushing for at least some type of limited sanctions, or at least, let's say, a measure maybe of restricting some arms to show their displeasure. But again, domestic intersects with international, and then you turn the kaleidoscope. So this, in one hand, will reinforce Turkey as it tries to put pressure on Saudi Arabia, but it gives Russia an opportunity to come in and appear to be Riyadh's, well, let's say, supporter at this time. And if Saudi Arabia feels that it is getting too much pressure from the Americans, from the Turks, from other countries, then we talk about decades of an assumption of a U.S.-Saudi strategic relationship being at the core of the Middle East. Possibly you see that changing very quickly within the next few months, next few years.
Justin, what do you make of it?
Well, I'm not so sure that the relationship can turn on a dime like that. Certainly the pressure that the White House, or certainly the American president feels is coming domestically. There's very little indication that he bows to international pressure on these things. But I think that if there's to be some realignment, it will take some time.
Tristan, thank you. Let's pull up that photograph again. We have France's leader, Emmanuel Macron. Well, now there's a man with a lot on his mind. Back at home, protest by people dressed in yellow high-vis vests complaining about fuel prices. And then, when he arrives in Argentina, he's greeted by no one, except, you guessed it, men in yellow vests. Alexis Poulain, we'll come over to you in Paris. That was pretty funny from this side of the English Channel. What was it like in France?
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, it was, how tragedy, leaving France in a state of turmoil and going to Argentina to be met by one of these yellow vest wearers. Of course, it was not French. He was not manifesting in front of the French president.
Alexei, to be clear, this additional tax on fuel was in order to protect the environment. And now the protesters have won. That is going to be scrapped.
Yes, correct. It was initially presented as one of the green measures to help and have a green tax on oil to help the ecological transition. But it turned out that the money that would be collected through this tax would go to the state budget, because we're needing a lot of money because of tax evasion and some fiscal present for the riches. So the people wearing the yellow vest said, well, no, it's not, and it's another tax that is just here to take the money from the poorer people of France. And that was the start of it all. It was the sparkle that made this movement grow until what it is now.
Are you saying that there is a real threat to the government of Emmanuel Macron? He could actually be pushed out by this?
Well, we have strong institutions in France. We have the Republic, but the Republic was made for the people, by the people. And what's happening now is that the people are on the streets. It's never great. And one of French presidents, Pierre Mendès France, I think, or Prime Minister, said the Republic was created in the street and will end in the streets. So what is the threat right now is that the people are marching to the sound of Macron, get out. They're not about tax prices anymore. They want to get the president to resign. Of course, the law of France are not made for the president to resign, but he could clearly change government. Yeah. And clearly the message is change the policy you want to implement in France. We don't want that anymore.
Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the show that we have experts and politicians meeting in Poland to help save the planet from climate change. And now we can see that domestic politics comes first.
As always, yes. I mean, you can see that whatever the urgency, the emergency, it's, of course, nation first. I mean, Donald Trump was elected to make America great again. And if you look at Emmanuel Macron has been elected saying Europe will be great and I'll be an international president. But then what happened? He went to Argentina and people had him come back. And he didn't go to the meeting for COP24 about the climate. Also, climate is high on his agenda. Now he has to answer the question of the French and make sure that tax and regulation actually work for the people and not for the few. And ecological transition cannot work if it's not a benefit for everyone.
Well, international coordination isn't looking too good right now. But what about Trump's dinner with China's president at the G20 summit? Trump tweeted, "My meeting in Argentina with President Xi of China was an extraordinary one. Relations with China have taken a big leap forward." Let me go to you, Scott Lucas. Initially, markets rallied, and then they started to tumble again. Mixed messages coming out of that meeting.
Well, very mixed, because the headline doesn't match the reality.
Right.
The headline was, oh, we have a breakthrough here. The reality is that the commitments were very vague. That is, there's a 90-day breathing period before the U.S. increases tariffs further on China, and China gives an unspecified willingness to take in more U.S. products. And that's why by Tuesday of this week, Donald Trump had shifted his tone and said, "I am tariff man," which sent the Dow Jones tumbling.
That is the new
falls.
Yeah, that is the new Marvel anti-hero coming out around Christmas time. Tristan, last question to you before we get on to our body language experts. We've tried to take a look at the G20 communique, but it was such a opaque language, we stopped reading after a while. Did you read it, and did they actually achieve anything?
Well, I struggled through it, and I somehow made it to the end. It's a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing, just a lot of spilt ink to mix metaphors. There's nothing in there of any substance that really pushes the agenda forward. And I think in many ways, this is the legacy of this G20 summit. Things didn't get better and things didn't really get worse. It was more about treading water this year.
Tristan, Scott, Alexei, thank you all very much for your contributions to this part of the Nexus. If the communique doesn't tell us much, what about the body language? What did the leaders give away without meaning to? Let's start with a close-up of the three amigos. A Mexican, American, and Canadian walk into a room, and what do you get? Well, a whole lot of NAFTA. Just kidding, there's a new free trade deal in town, and it's called Muskmaka. Well, something like that. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. Unless, of course, you're Canadian. Then it's CUSMA, the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement. Oh, but of course, if you're Mexican, it might be the TMEUC, the Treaty Mexico-United States-Canada. They're all on the same page, then. But the reworking of NAFTA has been a battle.
And battles sometimes make great friendships, so it's really terrific.
A little one-sided perhaps, but that probably came out in those unspoken, awkward moments. Did you notice Trump's little intake of breath?
This has been a battle.
The pursed lips, or that little smile or smirk? And what about his hands? Busy as always, but at times, apparently, not knowing where to put them. Unlike the Mexican presidents, firm. It all proved a bit confusing for Trump.
Which is the one that matters.
Each of us get a copy.
And that should please Canada's foreign minister, who seems to be loving the deal. Either way, her boss, Trudeau, was a little stiff while signing the agreement, and unlike the other two, wasn't playing show and tell. Well, let's bring in Lynn Franklin now, a body language expert and author of Getting Others to Do What You Want. Lynn, before we get into every little diagnosis of what happened there, just explain a little bit about your discipline and why should anyone believe your analysis? Is it founded in science?
Fortunately, yes, it is. Neuroscience has been expanding in the past, 10 years. And it's how the brain works, but it's also how we notice other people in space. Here's the cool thing. Our conscious mind can pay attention to about 10 to 50 bits of information per second. Our subconscious minds can process about 14 million bits of information, which means you and I are collecting data about how you are standing in space, your facial expressions, all this sort of thing. And a lot for decades, we've not paid really much attention to what this means. Now we are. There's a renewed interest in it because the science has expanded, and that gives us as human beings and business people an opportunity to create better connection with people because we know what to pay attention to.
So what are you picking up in that report then?
Obviously, all three leaders wish to show that they are in charge and in control. And sometimes their facial expressions and their body language show that they really don't feel that way. So it's the conflict between the conscious mind and what we want to show. And most of the time we can choose what we show in our facial expressions, but the rest of our body language, for most of us, we're pretty unaware of.
When you look at them signing the agreement, which of those men is faking it? And which of them does feel satisfied by the agreement?
I'd say Trump feels satisfied. The other two, particularly Trudeau, are faking it, from what I see.
When you look behind Justin Trudeau, just over his shoulder, there's the Canadian Foreign Minister, and she's smiling or putting a brave face on it the entire time. Is that a genuine smile, as far as you can tell, or not?
From what I can tell, it is not. The tight smile and the excessive nodding, to me, indicates somebody is trying to put a brave, positive face on it.
We saw Trump's hand movements. He's on the shoulder, he's over the shoulder. We saw Peña Nieto there, grabbing the arm firmly to look assertive. What do you read into that?
Trump is known for using touch to dominate. And obviously the Mexican president is trying hard to stay in the game if we're just taking a look at body language.
Yeah. Let's take a look at Mohammed bin Salman now, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. When they were getting ready for that photograph, he's on the end of the stage looking rather lonely, but I don't know, from an amateur's reading of it, given what we know about the context, is he just trying to project that he's content with this position, or is there something else going on?
Of course, we can only assume what's going on in his mind. But in this instance, obviously, he is in a situation where there are concerns throughout the world about the recent Jamal Khashoggi assassination and how involved he is in that. So as I read his body language, what I'm seeing is that he wants to appear relaxed and engaged, to put a brave face on this, to show that he is not someone who others would consider involved in this.
What did you make of the Mohammed bin Salman and Vladimir Putin handshake? Was that genuine? Was it warm? What was it?
And I look at that, and of course this is just my opinion, but these were the two bad boys of the G20 summit. Obviously, the Jamal Khashoggi event for MBS and the Ukraine shipboarding for Putin. So for me, when I saw that giant handshake, it became, all right, so we are the two people who are on the off list right now, and we need to band together.
Let me show you something else. Now we have Emmanuel Macron, France's president, discussing something with Mohammed bin Salman. Take a look at this body language and tell me what you see.
When I look at Macron, I see a fellow who processes information kinesthetically through touch and feeling. He's very close to MBS. I also see him steepling his hands, and the general indication of that is somebody who is confident and is very convinced in his position. And obviously the only words that we were able to pick up from the audio are things like, "You never listen to me," and "I'm worried." This would support the idea that he is very concerned about MBS's position and wants to make sure that he confronts him.
One last question before you go from my colleagues who have asked me to ask you, if you're looking to get a raise from your boss or to persuade anybody else of anything, given that you're the author of Getting Others to Do What You Want, what key advice would you give them?
First, set a goal for your meeting. Know what it is that you want. Because when you do that, you send information from your conscious mind down to your subconscious mind, which has access to that 14 million bits of information per second. And it will automatically bubble up strategies that you can use to support your idea of getting a raise. And the second thing is to present your information in a way that it is of interest to the person you're speaking with. Why do they want you around? What value do you add? Why do you deserve the raise? And make sure that you present the information in that way that is of interest to the person you're trying to get the money from.
Lynn Franklin, on that invaluable piece of advice, thank you very much for coming on the Nexus today. And thank you also for watching. You can see this episode and all our others on our YouTube channel. Until next week, thank you and goodbye.